Hey guys, welcome back. This time around we're going to begin our exploration into the autonomic nervous system. Now the autonomic nervous system is going to be a branch of the motor division of our nervous system. The motor neurons that come from the motor branches are going to be issued from the central nervous system and travel along the peripheral nervous system via cranial and spinal nerves. Now within these nerves are going to be nerve fibers for the somatic and the autonomic nervous systems. So far we've emphasized the importance of the somatic nervous system when we looked at things such as the regulation of skeletal muscle contractions. The autonomic nervous system is going to be important in regulating and maintaining internal tranquility, even in an ever-changing external environment, by regulating activities of the visceral organs and glands. The word autonomic means self-governing and accurately depicts a nervous system that is regulated involuntarily. That means that this nervous system regulates bodily activities without us having to consciously think about it. So frequently we think of this one as a subconscious nervous system. It regulates things such as our heart rate and our blood pressure without us having to consciously think about it. The autonomic nervous system includes both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches. Before we look at and try to differentiate these two types of branches, let's first differentiate the unique anatomical and physiological features of the somatic and the autonomic nervous systems. Now, while these systems' essential role is maintaining homeostasis, they each reach their goals differently. For instance, they each have different types of effector organs, they have different efferent pathways, and they will have different types of neurotransmitters found at their axonal terminals. Let's first reflect on what the somatic has going on. If we look at the somatic, we realize that it's also known as the voluntary nervous system because we have to consciously think for these activities to occur. The effector organ of the somatic is always skeletal muscles. And if you recall, the cell body is going to be found in the central nervous system and issued via either cranial or spinal nerves all the way to the skeletal muscle will be an axon that is going to be heavily myelinated and usually very thick. There's no ganglia associated with the somatic. Ganglia is going to be sites where cell bodies will be found outside the central nervous system. Being that the axon is heavily myelinated and quite thick, we think of it as a group A type fiber. Its conduction rate is going to be very quick, very rapid. The neurotransmitter that's going to be found at the axonal terminal of all somatic axons is going to be acetylcholine. And the effect at the effector organ for somatic axons is always going to be stimulatory. On the flip side, if we look at the autonomic, we will see that the autonomic is also known as the involuntary nervous system. We notice here from the diagram that the effector organs are going to be cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, visceral organs if you want to think of it, and glands. Notice though that with the autonomic nervous system, instead of having that one very long axon, we have what's known as a 2-neuron chain. And that's going to mean that we have two different axons being issued here. Notice that the first axon is going to be issued from the central nervous system. And it's going to travel out into the peripheral nervous system along the spinal nerves or cranial nerves. And it's going to meet up with the second neuron somewhere out in the peripheral nervous system space, at a place that we would know as a ganglia. Now, the axon that comes into the ganglionic space is going to be known as the preganglionic axon. And the axon that exits from the ganglionic space is going to be known as the post. Now, the pre-axon is going to be much thinner than that we would find in the somatic and much less myelinated, whereas the post-ganglionic axon will be even thinner than the pre and typically is not myelinated at all. Now, what this means is the conduction rate of an electrical event is going to be much slower in an autonomic versus that of the somatic. Other things that I'd want you to see in comparison is that the neurotransmitter released from the autonomic nervous system can be acetylcholine if we're talking about parasympathetic. It is typically acetylcholine also in the sympathetic, but only at the axonal terminal of the axonal terminal of our postganglionic axon is going to be typically norepinephrine. Now the effect, once it gets to the organ, and the effect of these neurotransmitters can either be excitatory or inhibitory in the autonomic nervous system, directly dependent upon the neurotransmitter that's being released and the receptor site on the effector organ that it binds to. It is important, though, to appreciate there is a synergy between these systems. The central nervous system coordinates the functions of the somatic and the autonomic nervous systems in a way that they both function cooperatively to fine-tune the bodily functions. Most spinal and cranial nerves, recall, contain both somatic and autonomic nerve fibers. This essential cooperation is important and is best realized by looking at some kind of event in our body, such as exercise. During an exercising event, the somatic nervous system regulates the skeletal muscle contractions. Yet during this event, if you recall, the more we have muscle contractions, the more ATP we burn. And to replace that ATP, we have to do cellular respiration. And the most efficient type of cellular respiration is going to be aerobic cellular respiration. So when we're doing these skeletal muscle contractions, the somatic nervous system controls that. The autonomic nervous system, though, is working hard to regulate heart rate, to increase our heart rate, to dilate our respiratory passageways, and to modify our blood pressure so that we can ensure that we can get the blood to the needed areas. The autonomic nervous system functions via a dual innervation of two opposing systems that regulate and fine-tune each other's effects. What this means is that we have two systems here, opposing actions that are antagonistic to one another. What one stimulates, the other will inhibit. Now those two systems go by the names of parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. The parasympathetic is also thought of as the resting or digesting system. The parasympathetic division is going to take care of housekeeping chores and is designed to keep the body homeostatic while conserving as much energy as possible. The housekeeping chores include regulating heart rate, digestion rate, and elimination rate when the body's at rest. It's responsible for returning the body to homeostatic conditions after exercise or any other conditions that may have triggered a sympathetic response. An easy way to remember the parasympathetic nervous system is by using the letter D. Now, the D stands for digestion, defecation, or diuresis. The sympathetic, on the other hand, is going to be important in mobilizing the body during extreme situations and managing the body during stressful events such as fight, flight, or fright. In my case, it'd be managing my stressful situation as I walk up a flight of stairs or as I exercise. When you exercise, the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for that pounding heart that occurs. It's responsible for the rapid, deep breathing and the cold, sweaty skin that you have. Now, during the exercise, we'll see that this division is going to do things such as regulate and constrict the diameter of the blood vessels that are going to the visceral organs. Those visceral organs that are responsible for digestion and elimination are going to be partially inhibited during a sympathetic event. Why? Because we need to redirect that blood to the skeletal muscles and maintain the oxygenated levels for the central nervous system to function. This is a good scenario as to why your mother says don't eat a meal and go swimming afterwards. But first allow your body to digest the food that you've just eaten. Because if the blood's going to be shunned away from those visceral organs, smooth muscles won't be able to get the oxygen they need, milk the food through in a proper rate, and you'll find cramping occur in those visceral organs. Other things that the sympathetic would control during a sympathetic or emergency event, stressful event, would be your heart and your skeletal muscle blood vascularization. You'd see that it would dilate there. You get sort of flush face, and you get more blood going to the surface of your heart so that you can have those muscle contractions at a much more rapid rate. You'd find that your bronchioles, that's the respiratory passageways to your lungs, would dilate so that you could deliver more air to the surface of the lungs, thus more oxygen in a given moment. And you'd see that the liver would actually stimulate the release of glucose. Glucose that is important in ATP production, both at the skeletal muscle, but more importantly at the central nervous system during this excited events. Now, it is important to realize that what the parasympathetic stimulates, the sympathetic nervous system will inhibit, and vice versa. A lot of those effects we can play out here by looking at things such as your eyes and looking at the activities the parasympathetic controls there. The parasympathetic is going to be responsible for constricting your irises so that your pupils get smaller. That will allow you to focus on things closer up, whereas the sympathetic nervous system would inhibit this activity if it's stimulated, and the result of that would be that the pupil would dilate and you'd be able to get a broader field of view and be able to have gland activities that occur with the parasympathetic are going to be inhibited by the sympathetic when it kicks in. Glands such as the nasal and lacrimal and gastric and pancreas are going to be stimulated to secrete materials by the parasympathetic nervous system, whereas the sympathetic nervous system would inhibit this secretion. And it would also constrict the blood vascularization supplying these glands to cut down on the production as well. Saliva and sweat glands, if you take a look at those, both of those are water-based products. The parasympathetic nervous system at rest would produce a water-based kind of product in saliva so it could cut down on the friction as you eat food and things of that nature. Sympathetic, on the flip side, though, the salivary glands are going to start producing a more thicker mucus, and the reason being is to conserve the water because of possible dehydration. And the sweat glands are going to be copiously producing sweat. Think of when you're exercising, you sweat, but also think when you're nervous. Your palms of your hands, they usually get moist during the time in which you're apprehensive. Now, the adrenal medulla has no innervation by the parasympathetic, but it does by the sympathetic. The sympathetic can trigger it to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, think about that. The neurotransmitter that's found at the end of the postganglionic axon of the sympathetic is actually norepinephrine. But here we see that norepinephrine is going to be released by the adrenal medulla. In that case, it's going to be released to supplement the neurotransmitter, but in this case it would be known as a hormone since it's being released from a gland. You can see the erectile pili muscles. Those are the muscles that regulate the location of the hairs on the surface of your skin. They're going to have no effect from the parasympathetic, no innervation at all. But the sympathetic, they'll be stimulated to contract, causing the hair to stand up. Now, in other animals, that can make the other animals look larger when they're opposing a predator. In our case, what it does for us is it opens up a pocket for warmer air to be able to leave, and it causes goosebumps in us if you think about it. Now, with the heart, when you think of the heart muscle itself, the parasympathetic nervous system is going to actually decrease heart rate, slow heart rate, whereas the sympathetic is going to increase heart rate so that we can increase blood flow during times of emergency. The blood vessels associated with the surface of the heart itself, the parasympathetic has no effect on those, but the sympathetic will dilate those blood vessels, allowing more blood to flow out. Think about the same time that the heart is pumping at a quicker rate, we also need to pump that blood back to the lungs so that we can reoxygenate it. So there's a coordinated event going on by the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system increases heart rate but also dilates the bronchioles being the respiratory passageways leading to the lungs so that we can get more air to the lungs. Let's think about that and coordinate that one last moment. What is the one thing that a lot of people who have allergic reactions and have the constriction in the respiratory passageways carry with them at all times? They carry an epistick. Why? Because it is the epinephrine that causes the dilation. When we see that constriction occurring, that's going to be a parasympathetic event. But if we have an epistick, we can oppose that parasympathetic by injecting into our body the epinephrine that would normally be released from the adrenal medulla to stimulate those bronchioles to dilate and allow our respiratory passageways to conduct air. You guys have a great day. I'll see you soon. We'll take a look at some of the neurotransmitters. Be safe.